I always thought my backyard would be the place where I'd watch my daughter laugh under the golden sunset, where her wedding would be a dream stitched from years of love, hope, and memories. But as the soft music played and guests began to arrive, the sound of happiness was crushed by blaring sirens. I froze, my chest tightening, as police cruisers pulled up in front of my house, the same cruisers I oversaw every day. And then I saw her. HOA Karen, arms crossed, smug smile plastered on her face, pointing at my backyard like she'd just caught a criminal. She didn't know yet. She didn't know who she had just declared war on. The day had started perfectly. Emily, my only daughter, looked like a vision in white, her eyes sparkling with nervous excitement. She'd been through so much. Losing her mother to cancer 3 years ago had shattered her in ways I couldn't fix. But this wedding, this was her healing. I'd promised her we'd do it right here at home, in the backyard her mother had designed with her own hands, surrounded by the people who loved her most. But the HOA had other plans. Ever since I'd moved into Willow Creek Estates, Karen, the HOA president, had made my life a slow-burning hell. She hated that I didn't kiss her ring like the others. She hated that I wouldn't repaint my house in approved beige, or cut down the old oak tree in my yard just because it wasn't community uniform. But the thing she hated most, that I didn't bow when she threatened me. So when Emily told me she wanted the wedding here, I knew Karen would twitch. But I didn't expect her to go this far. I had filed all the necessary noise permits with the county. I had notified every neighbor personally, except Karen, because she never answered the door. Everything was legal. Everything was perfect. Until she called 911. The first officer to step out of the cruiser was a young patrolman I'd personally trained. His face pale as he realized where he was. "Chief," he whispered, as if unsure how to even address me in this situation. Behind him, Karen strutted forward in her ridiculous sun hat and floral dress, holding her phone like it was a sword of justice. "This entire event is a violation of HOA bylaws," she announced loudly, making sure the guests could hear. "There's noise, there's parking congestion. There's a bride trying to marry the man she loves." I cut in, my voice low but sharp. Emily clutched my arm, confusion written all over her face. Karen smirked, clearly thinking she had me trapped. "The HOA rules are clear. No large gatherings without board approval. And since I'm the board, I'm shutting this down." I called the police to enforce it. I could feel my blood heating, but years of being in law enforcement had taught me control. My guests were staring, whispers passing through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Emily's groom, Jake, stepped forward, trying to keep the peace. "Look, ma'am, we're just trying to celebrate your trespassing," Karen snapped, cutting him off. "This whole wedding is trespassing." My jaw tightened. "On my own property. Property within the HOA," she said, with that condescending little tilt of her chin. I turned to the young officer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Officer, do you see any violation of county law here?" He hesitated, glancing between me, Karen, and the wedding guests. "No, sir. But she's saying the HOA bylaws aren't criminal law," I said flatly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen's face flushed. "Maybe not, but they're enforceable through civil action, and I'll have you in court so fast." "Do it," I said, stepping closer so she could see the steel in my eyes. "But today, you're leaving right now." Her smile returned, slow and venomous. "You think you're untouchable because you're the police chief? But I've taken down bigger men than you. Enjoy your little party. It's the last one you'll ever have here." And with that, she turned and walked away, heels clicking. On the driveway, Emily's hands were shaking as she gripped mine. "Dad, what if she ruins this?" I forced a smile for her, though inside, my rage was coiling tighter than barbed wire. "She won't. I promise you, baby girl. Not today." We went through with the ceremony, but the shadow of Karen's threat hung over every moment. Every time Emily's laugh rang out, I caught myself looking toward the street, half expecting her to return. And when the night was over, when the guests had gone and Emily was off to her honeymoon, I sat on my porch in the dark, staring at Karen's house. She thought she'd scared me. She thought she'd won. But she had no idea that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. Because I wasn't just a father or a homeowner. I was the police chief of this county, and I knew exactly how to dismantle her little empire without breaking a single law. And I was going to make her regret the day she touched my daughter's wedding. The sound of my fiancé's voice trembled through the phone. They're here again, the HOA people. And Karen screaming into her phone about calling 911. I could hear the distant shouts, the chaos bleeding into the edges of our peaceful Saturday morning. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my jaw clenching so hard it hurt. This was supposed to be a happy day, the day we put the final touches on the backyard for our wedding next weekend. Instead, I was racing home, the anger boiling in my chest. Every second dragging like it knew I was desperate. When I pulled up, the scene looked like something out of a bad TV drama. Karen stood in the middle of my yard, her hands waving wildly, as she yelled into her phone, "Yes, officer, they're holding an illegal gathering." "No, I don't care if it's their property." Behind her, 2 HOA board members stood with clipboards, scribbling notes like they were conducting an inspection on my life. My fiancée, Emily, stood by the archway we decorated with flowers, her face pale and eyes glassy. She had been crying. I could see the redness around her eyes even from the driveway. That sight alone was enough to light a fire in my chest. I walked toward them, my boots crunching on the gravel, every step deliberate. "Karen," I said, my voice even but low, "what exactly do you think you're doing on my property without permission?" She didn't even look at me, just continued her performance into the phone, raising her voice so the police she was calling could hear how terrible we were. "This is a violation of HOA regulations 1(b), 17(c), and 21(a). One of the clipboard men said, his nose buried in the paper. He didn't even bother making eye contact. I looked at him, then at Karen, then at my trembling fiancé. I wanted to say it right then. I wanted to let the truth slip out, to tell them that the very police she was calling worked under me. That I was the one they answered to. But there was something in me that told me to wait, to let this play out. To let them dig themselves deep into a hole they couldn't climb out of. Emily stepped closer, her voice shaking but firm. "We're just decorating for our wedding. It's next weekend." We filed the noise permit. We followed every rule. Karen laughed, a high, shrill sound that made my teeth grit. "Oh, sweetie," she said, dripping venom. "The HOA doesn't care about your permits. We care about keeping this neighborhood decent. And backyard weddings. That's trailer park stuff." Something inside me snapped. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I kept my face still. "This conversation is over," I said, stepping between Karen and Emily. "Get off my property, now." Karen smirked like she had already won. "The police will be here any minute. Let's see how smug you are when they shut this little operation down." And right on cue, I heard sirens in the distance. Emily's hand tightened around mine. She didn't know yet. She didn't know that the moment those sirens pulled up, the entire game would change. When the patrol car stopped in front of my house, 2 officers stepped out, both of them my friends, my colleagues. I caught the look of recognition on their faces, and one of them had to fight back a grin when he saw me standing there. Karen strutted toward them like she was about to deliver the winning blow. "Officers," she began dramatically, "thank goodness you're here. These people are illegally setting up for a large event, It's against HOA rules. You need to shut them down immediately." The younger officer turned his eyes to me. "Is that so, Chief?" he asked, his tone dripping with amusement. Karen froze. Chief." She stammered, her head whipping toward me. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. "Yes," I said, pulling out my badge and letting it catch the sunlight. "Chief of Police." "And now, Karen, we're going to have a real conversation about trespassing, harassment, and wasting police resources." Karen's face went from red to white in an instant. But I wasn't even close to done with her by the time the police cruiser rolled up to the edge of my property. I was already standing in the driveway, arms crossed, still in my wedding suit, and my bride clutching my arm. The first officer out of the car wasn't a stranger. It was Officer Daniels, a man who had served under me for over a decade. His eyes darted from me to Emily, then to the string lights swaying in the warm evening. "Breeze, Chief," he said, his tone caught between confusion and embarrassment. I could almost hear the silent conversation playing in his head. What the hell am I doing here? Karen was already marching toward him, her hands flailing like she was swatting invisible flies. "Officer, you need to shut this entire thing down. Immediately. They're violating the noise ordinance," and she stopped mid-rant when Daniels held up his hand. "Ma'am, you said there was a public disturbance." "I see a private wedding on private property," he said flatly, his gaze locking on mine like he already knew the truth. The guests were silent now, every pair of eyes darting between the three of us. Emily's fingers dug into my arm. I could feel her trembling, not because she feared the law, but because she feared what this night was turning into. The air was thick with that awkward heaviness that comes when joy collides with cruelty. "Chief," Daniel said carefully, "do you want me to?" He trailed off, as if unsure how much authority I wanted to exercise in that moment. I took a slow step forward until I was standing just a few feet from Karen. Her smugness was flickering now, like a candle about to burn out. "Karen," I said, in a low, steady voice, "you called my department on my own wedding. You trespassed onto my property. And now you're about to find out exactly how bad of a mistake that was." Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find her footing again, but the words never came. I turned to Daniels. "Document everything," I ordered. "Every word she said, every step she's taken onto my land, and every guest she's disrupted tonight." Daniels nodded without hesitation, pulling out his body cam and starting the recording. Karen's face flushed a dangerous red. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "You can't just—" "I can," I said sharply, "and I will." That was when the murmurs started among the guests, whispers that traveled like a ripple through the crowd. Some people had pulled out their phones, recording the scene. My aunt, who rarely spoke up in any confrontation, was whispering to my mother that this was the kind of thing you'd see in a movie. Emily leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't let her ruin this night for us." There was a plea in her tone, not for vengeance, but for protection. And in that moment, something in me shifted. It wasn't just about shutting Karen down anymore. It was about making sure she could never pull this kind of stunt again, with me, with Emily, or with any other neighbor. I glanced at Daniels, my mind already working through the legal angles. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, filing a false police report. And that wasn't even scratching the surface of the HOA's bylaw violations that I knew for a fact she had committed over the years. Karen must have sensed the danger because she suddenly started backing up toward the property line. "This is ridiculous. I'll be speaking to the HOA board first thing in the morning," she spat out. "Do that," I said calmly, "and make sure they know I'll be speaking to the county attorney before they finish their morning coffee." The silence that followed was broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering curses under her breath. But I didn't take my eyes off her until she was out of sight. Daniel stepped closer. "What now, Chief?" he asked. I looked at Emily, then at the guests. "We finish what we started," I said, "but tomorrow. Tomorrow we start taking back more than just one night." As Daniels left and the music cautiously started back up, I knew deep down this wasn't over. Karen had humiliated herself tonight. But she was too proud, too bitter, to let it end here. She'd be back, and when she came, I'd be ready by the time the wedding guests had been escorted back to their seats. The atmosphere still felt heavy with the sting of what had just happened. Emily's hands were trembling as she tried to straighten her veil. I reached for her, cupping her face gently. "We're okay," I whispered, though deep down I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The image of Karen smirking from across the fence burned in my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But right now, my focus was Emily, making sure she knew that nothing and no one could ruin the fact that she was about to be my wife. We resumed the ceremony. And though our friends and family clapped and smiled, I could feel the quiet undercurrent of anger swirling through the crowd. People kept glancing toward the fence where Karen had been, some with disbelief, others with outrage. I could see my officers now blending back into the crowd, still keeping an eye on things. It was a relief to have them there, not as police, but as friends who knew what it meant to stand by each other in hard moments. As Emily and I exchanged vows, my voice cracked, not just from the emotion of promising my life to her, but from the lingering ache of knowing our day had been targeted. I thought about how Karen had marched into our lives over and over again, each time more determined to make herself the center of everything. I remembered the petty HOA fines, the unannounced property inspections, and the countless letters demanding we cut down trees or change our fence. All of it had been leading to this, her ultimate power play. But there's something she had never understood. My patience was not weakness, it was restraint. And after today, that restraint was gone. The moment the ceremony ended, we hugged our guests and moved straight into the reception in the backyard. Music played, laughter returned, and the smell of food filled the air. But I could feel Karen's eyes on us from her upstairs window. She didn't even try to hide it. She stood there, arms folded, sipping from a mug like she was watching a show. Emily leaned into me at one point and whispered, "She's not done. I can feel it." And she was right, just after the first dance, I noticed something strange. A black SUV slowly rolling down the street. It stopped near Karen's driveway, and two people in business suits got out. They walked straight to her door, carrying clipboards. I didn't recognize them immediately, but their badges caught the light. County Zoning Enforcement. My stomach twisted. Was this another move from her? A few minutes later, Karen came storming out, shouting at them, pointing toward my backyard like a child throwing a tantrum. I couldn't hear the words over the music, but I didn't need to. I could read her body language like a book. She was trying to shut us down again, this time using zoning laws. My guests started to notice too, the whispers spreading like wildfire. I walked calmly to the front yard, meeting the officers halfway. "Afternoon," I said evenly. "I'm Chief Daniel Hayes. Is there a problem here?" Their eyes widened slightly, not out of fear, but recognition. They'd worked with me before. One of them hesitated before saying, "We received a complaint about an unpermitted large gathering." I gestured toward the yard. "This is a private wedding reception on private property. Everything's legal, and I can get you the paperwork." In 5 minutes, Karen overheard and snapped, "It's disturbing the peace." The noise is but before she could finish. I stepped toward her, my voice low enough for only her to hear. "Karen, you're standing on very thin ice. I've been patient with you for months, but you've crossed a line. You're not just Ruining events, you're harassing people. And I promise you, harassment has consequences. She didn't flinch, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. For the first time, I think she realized I wasn't going to let this slide. The county officers left shortly after, clearly uninterested in playing into her game. Karen, however, didn't retreat quietly. She stood in her driveway, muttering to herself, staring at our celebration like she was planning her next move. Back inside, Emily took my hand and asked quietly, "You're going to do something about her, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. "Oh, I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to make sure she never has the power to pull this stunt on anyone else again." That night, after the last guest had left and Emily was inside changing, I sat at my desk and began pulling files, HOA records, county zoning complaints, copies of letters she'd sent, police reports from other neighbors who'd had run-ins with her. By the time I was done, I had a thick folder in front of me, a case file. Karen wanted a war. Fine, but she'd picked it with the wrong man. The moment the wedding was shut down, the joy drained from everyone's faces like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother's hands shook as she clutched her shawl. My father sat there, silently staring at the ground, and Emily, my bride, was holding back tears, pretending to be strong for me. Karen, standing smugly at the edge of my property with two officers who clearly didn't want to be there, thought she had one. She smirked like the devil himself had just handed her the victory she'd been craving. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, but I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't just a groom, that Nitai was the police chief. And if she thought she could humiliate me without consequences, she was about to learn otherwise. I could see the disappointment in my guests, their whispers about how unfair it all was. My goddaughter, barely 7, came up to me, tugging on my sleeve. "Uncle James, why did that lady stop the wedding? Did we do something bad?" That question broke something deep inside me. I knelt down, hugged her, and said softly, "No, sweetheart, she's the one who did something bad. And people who do bad things, they face the truth, sooner or later." I meant every word. I wasn't about to let Karen walk away thinking she could trample over me, my family, and my future wife. When the officers left, looking embarrassed and apologizing under their breath, I turned to Emily. She tried to smile, but I could see the pain in her eyes. "We'll fix this," I told her. "No, we'll end this." She nodded, trusting me without hesitation. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up in my study, reviewing HOA bylaws, pulling police reports, and digging into Karen's history. I knew from experience that people like her always left a trail of dirt behind them. They just hoped nobody cared enough to dig. By sunrise, I had a thick folder in front of me. Noise complaints against other neighbors, petty fines over ridiculous rules, reports of harassment, and the most interesting find of all, a recent HOA financial audit that showed missing funds, tens of thousands of dollars that were unaccounted for. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This was about exposing Karen for the fraud she truly was. But I didn't want to simply charge her with something. That would be too quick, too easy. I wanted her to feel the same public humiliation she had forced on me and Emily. So I made some calls, quiet ones, to a few trusted colleagues in the department, and to a local reporter who had been investigating HOA corruption in the area. Within hours, the seeds of my revenge were planted. Karen wouldn't just lose her power, she'd lose her reputation, her money, and her ability to control anyone ever again. 2 days later, I arranged for a special HOA meeting. It wasn't really my idea, it was the HOA board's, after rumors of missing funds began circulating thanks to a little anonymous tip. Karen, of course, showed up in full force, confident she could talk her way out of anything. I sat quietly in the back, as she tried to brush off the accusations with fake smiles and condescending remarks. But then, the reporter I'd tipped off stood up with a camera crew. The moment Karen saw them, her smirk faltered. The next 20 minutes were pure gold. The reporter presented documented proof of the missing funds, showed interviews from neighbors. She had bullied and even played audio clips of her screaming threats at elderly residents over lawn decorations. The room erupted with outrage. One board member slammed his hands on the table and shouted, "You're done, Karen, you're done. Here." And in that moment, I leaned forward from my seat and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Funny, isn't it? You called the cops to ruin my wedding. Turns out, the police are here to ruin you." Her face turned pale. She stuttered, tried to deny everything, but the evidence was too overwhelming. That meeting ended with Karen being removed from her HOA. Position effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation. The same neighbors she once intimidated now looked at her with disgust, some even booing her as she left. But I wasn't finished yet. Oh no, this was just the start. The sun was setting when I realized just how far Karen and the HOA were willing to go. It was supposed to be the most peaceful week of my life, preparing for my daughter's backyard wedding, making final touches to the lights, flowers, and music. But instead, it had turned into a nightmare. The harassment was no longer just calls, letters, or arguments at the fence. It had become something darker, something personal. That evening, as I stepped out to check the decorations, I noticed the floral arch handmade by my late wife's sister was gone, completely gone. My chest tightened, and my first thought was that maybe a strong gust of wind had taken it. But the weather had been calm. Then I saw them, Karen and two of her HOA friends, walking away with pieces of wood and the silk flowers stuffed into a trash bag. I stormed toward them. "What do you think you're doing?" My voice was low but shaking with rage. Karen didn't even flinch. Rules clearly state that no unapproved structures are allowed. That monstrosity didn't fit community standards. I clenched my fists. That monstrosity was my daughter's wedding arch. Her wedding is in 2 days. She smirked. Then she can get married at City Hall like a normal person. Your property is our neighborhood's image, and your circus doesn't belong here. I took a step closer. "Karen, you've crossed every line there is. You think because you've got a clipboard and a couple of followers, you can do whatever you want. You have no idea what's coming." That night, I stayed awake, my mind spinning. This was no longer about wedding decorations, it was about control. Karen wanted to prove she could take away anything from me. And now, she was trying to ruin my daughter's happiest. The next morning, I filed a formal police report, not just for vandalism and theft, but for harassment. Normally, as police chief, I don't personally handle my own cases. But this time, I was going to make an exception. I had the station pull up every complaint Karen had filed over the years. Dozens of them. Noise complaints, lawn violations, suspicious activity reports, all targeting neighbors she didn't like. She'd been abusing the system for years. And worse, I found 2 instances where she'd falsely reported crimes. Those were criminal offenses. While I worked the legal angle, I was also preparing for the wedding. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was going to make sure she regretted every move. 2 days before the ceremony, got a tip from one of my officers. Karen had been calling the county's event permit office trying to get our wedding shut down. She claimed we were hosting an illegal commercial gathering and charging guests for entry. The blatant lie made my blood boil. That night, I paid her a visit. She answered the door with her usual smug expression. But it faltered when she saw the badge around my neck. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm, "you've been interfering in my family's personal affairs." You've stolen property, filed false reports, and harassed multiple neighbors. I'm here to give you a choice back off now, or you'll be spending your weekend explaining yourself in court." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare arrest me over some silly little rules." I leaned in slightly. "Karen, I am the rules." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say another word. I walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway, pale and shaking. The next day, we rebuilt the wedding, arch bigger, brighter, and more beautiful than before. Neighbors we barely spoke to came forward to help, carrying flowers, lights, and decorations. It was as if Karen's cruelty had united everyone else against her. But I knew her. She wouldn't let this go. And I was ready for the final battle. By the time the sun was sinking into the horizon, my backyard, once a place of joy and laughter, had become the stage for something no one in our neighborhood would ever forget. The air was heavy with the golden glow of sunset, but beneath it there was tension as sharp as a knife. Every neighbor who had once been too afraid to stand up to the HOA was now peeking over their fences, some even stepping closer, as if drawn to the moment they'd been waiting for. Karen stood near the gate, still trying to shout over the murmurs. Her face twisted in disbelief, because the reality of what was happening was finally hitting her. She had no control anymore, and everyone knew it. I had spent the last few weeks building my case not just against her, but against the HOA board members who had backed her tyranny for years. Every fine they'd issued, every rule they'd bent in their favor, every unlawful action, I had it all on record. And today, right after the wedding she tried to destroy, I was making sure she paid for it. When I stepped forward, uniform on badge shining in the fading light, the crowd went quiet. Even the kids who had been playing near the hedge stopped and stared. "Karen," I said, voice steady but full of steel, "you've committed multiple crimes to night interference, with an official event, false reporting to law enforcement, and harassment. But that's not all. We've been digging deeper." Her eyes widened, darting between me and the officers I had called in from my own precinct. I nodded to Officer Miller, who stepped forward with a thick folder. "Over the last 2 years, the HOA board under your leadership has been misappropriating funds from homeowners' dues. That's embezzlement. We have witness statements, bank records, and signed documents." Karen's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Around us, people gasped. Some even muttered, "I knew it." I took a step closer. "And since you made the mistake of calling 911 tonight, everything was recorded, every false accusation, every aggressive act. It's all evidence now." I could see her hands trembling, but I wasn't done. I turned toward the crowd, raising my voice so every single person could hear me. "For years, people here have been bullied, threatened, and fined for the smallest things. Well, that ends today. Effective immediately, the county is seizing control of this HOA for a full investigation. You will all be refunded the money that was stolen, and Karen will be facing multiple charges." A cheer erupted from the neighbors, some clapping, some laughing in relief. Karen tried to push through the crowd, but 2 officers stopped her, reading her rights as they placed her in handcuffs. She turned to me, her voice cracking. "You can't do this to me." Ha! I met her eyes, calm but unshakable. "You did this to yourself." As they led her away, I caught a glimpse of my wife standing near the back porch, still in her wedding dress, tears glistening in her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. I walked over, and the moment my arms wrapped around her, all the chaos faded. "It's over," I whispered. She leaned into me, her voice soft. "We got our day, and so did everyone else." I smiled because she was right. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about ending years of abuse and showing every single person here that they didn't have to be afraid. By the time night fell, the backyard was filled with laughter again. Music played, Neighbors danced, and the wedding-hour wedding finally continued the way it was meant to. No more interruptions, no more shouting, no more HOA tyranny. Just joy. And somewhere in the distance, as the lights twinkled and my wife's hand rested in mine, I knew this was the perfect kind of just as slow, undeniable, and unforgettable.